we hope to do tonight is an event that represents a long-standing guideline of Israel studies at Northwestern to focus on other additional facets of Israeli society, other than, or in addition to the Arab-Israeli conflict. So we began more than a year ago with a large-scale launching conference of the program on the Zionist ideal in Israeli culture. Next year, in October, actually we already have the dates, we plan to have another international conference in collaboration with Ben Gurion University entitled A Tribute to Author Sami Michaeli. Concurrently, we also embarked on a new initiative, an annual seminar, which in 2016 will focus on, quote unquote, the reinvention, this is the title, the reinvention of Israeli economy from kibbutz to a startup nation. As for tonight, we want to discuss the upcoming Knesset elections due to be held on March 7th. We are fortunate to have with us Professor Yoram Peri, the Abraham S. and Jack K. Chair in Israel Studies, and the director of the Joseph and Alma Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at the University of Maryland at College Park. Did I get it right, Yoram? Thank you. So allow me to introduce Yoram, a longtime colleague and friend. He's a former political advisor to the late Prime Minister Rabin, founder and former head of the Chaim Herzog Institute for Media, Politics and Society, and professor of political sociology and communication at Tel Aviv University. So we were both in the same school for a good number of years. He's also the former editor-in-chief of an Israeli daily, which ceased to appear since then. Nothing to do with Yoram's position as editor-in-chief of that newspaper. He's born in Jerusalem, earned his BA and MA in political science sociology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and his PhD from the LSE in London, the London School of Economics. Now, Professor Peri, Yoram, as we call him, has held numerous prestigious academic positions, including visiting professorship at Harvard, Dartmouth, and elsewhere. Amongst his various public positions, Professor Peri was the president of the Association of Editors of the Israeli daily newspapers and a member of the Press Council in Israel. He published extensively on Israeli society, media, and politics. Some of his publications, I'm not enumerating them all. The Assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, published by Stanford University Press, Between Battles and Ballads, Israel Military in Politics, Cambridge University Press, Telepopulism, Media and Politics in Israel, Stanford University, and since 2011 he has been the editor of a periodical called Israel Studies Review, the flagship, I would say, of academic journal of the Association of Israel Studies, AIS. So this is our guest. As for the protocol today, we will begin with Yoram's presentation, which would last about more or less 30 minutes. Then I'll follow suit with a much shorter presentation. 10 minutes or so on the Arab vote, a field that I have studied in the past and presently in the elections. And then we will move to the chairs here and we'll perhaps ask each other some questions, interview each other, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A from the audience. We'll try to keep this framework of time. Now I'm in a bit of a dilemma because I'm both a speaker and a chairperson. So I don't know how I will conduct myself, particularly when it comes to my part. But we'll try to keep it within this frame. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Yoram Peri, and I say we are fortunate to have him because he was planned to fly from DC today. Well, this was not a very good choice because we might, and I was really petrified, because had he not come, I would have to give the which I wasn't prepared to. So luckily he made it. Yoram, please.
Thank you for coming. I called my wife an hour ago and I told her that I'm under blue sky and a wonderful sun. She was shocked because she said that DC has not been in such an attack since the Civil War. Everything is closed. Literally, everything is closed. So I'm lucky to be here. And I'm really happy to see you all. Let me start right away because I have only half an hour and it's not enough to explain Israeli politics. Usually you need much more than that. But I will tell you what I'm not going to do. And that is what someone already asked me in the corridor when we got in, what are going to be the results of the elections? So I told her I'm not going to talk about that because of an event that I will never forget. In 1996, the dramatic combat of elections where Netanyahu and Peres stood one against the other. The Israeli Foreign Ministry decided to do something special, and they invited diplomats and foreign correspondents to the Hilton Hotel in Jerusalem. There were about 400 people to the evening of the elections. And they brought three experts, the experts on Israeli politics, to that event. Three of us, I was one of them, three of us spoke between 8 and 10 o'clock about the Israeli elections, the Israeli political structure, the campaign and all that. 10 o'clock we watched the television and we watched the exit polls. And we heard that Peres won. So between 10 to 11:30 we explained why Peres won. At 10:30 there was nothing else to say. We closed the meeting, I got into my car in Jerusalem and went to Tel Aviv. On the way to Tel Aviv, 12 o'clock, news. Netanyahu won. I'm not sure whether the Israeli Foreign Ministry are having any more events like that. I decided not to talk about the results of the elections before the elections. If you force me to talk about that, I'll do it, but only at the later part of our evening. I won't start there. But I want to start with something which is very basic, and maybe I don't need it. But should I say a few words about the Knesset and the elections in Israel? Basic 101 Israeli politics. Very few words for those of you who don't know. Okay. So Israel is a parliamentary democracy, unlike yours. It has only one chamber, the Knesset, with 120 seats. It is a multi-party system, unlike many of the Western Europeans, particularly the British, that is the typical two-party system. Each time we have elections, about 24 parties compete, between 20 and 28 parties, and about a dozen parties are able to get into the Knesset. Because there are so many parties, none of the parties had an absolute majority. And therefore, we had a coalition government. The largest party has to invite few other parties to establish the coalition. In the past, when the largest party had 40, 45 seats, it was easy. In the last 20 years, the number of seats of the largest party is so small that you have to have very many parties to have a majority, to have more than 61 seats in the Knesset. 61 seats is not a good idea, because if you are dependent on only one vote and someone decides to vote against you, the government falls. So usually you want to have at least 70 seats, 70 members of Knesset to support you, and therefore you have 4 or 5 parties. And it means that you have parties from the different poles of the political spectrum, which makes the coalition almost non-governable. The elections are direct. We don't have electors like here. They are secret. You don't know what people are going to vote, though there are some ways to overcome that problem. There are equal elections. It sounds to you obvious. Why? How come they're not equal? Well, in the 20s, the first before the establishment of the state, during the Yishuv period, when they had elections to the voluntary institutions of the Jewish community in then Palestine, the ultra-Orthodox parties said we cannot have equal elections because first of all, our elections should be only for men, not for women. So the secular party said, how come? We are a new, modern society. Everybody should have the right to vote. And then the Orthodox party said, okay, if you insist on that, men should have 2 votes and women only 1 vote. And the reason what they gave was quite interesting. They say, we are not going to let our women vote. So our men should have 2 votes. The secular parties said, no way. And since then, the elections were postponed 2 or 3 years, but then the first elections were equal, and since then, when the state was established in 1948, it applied to Israel. The most important thing are 2. One is the elections are national. We don't have constituencies or districts. The entire state is 1 district. The elections are proportional. This is the thing that most of my students find very difficult to understand. They are proportional. Namely, the number of voters that voted for my party will be reflected in the number of seats that my party will get in the Knesset. So if my party got 20% of the voters, this party will get 20% of the 120 seats in the Knesset. The threshold was very, very low in the past, less than 1%. Technically 1%, but it was less than 1%. And then it went up, and today you have to vote for, you have to have 4 to cross the threshold of 3.25%, which is 4 people. If you get less than 4 representatives, you cannot be a member of the Knesset. Because this is the major change today. Just one story about that. Because the threshold was so low, lowest than any other state in the world, in the 80s there was a Jewish crook from France who decided to run away from French police. He went to Israel. And he thought that if he will be elected to the Knesset, he will get immunity and he will not be extradited to France. Then we didn't have to have much money invested in elections. He was very rich, so he spent money on the right and on the left. He was elected. Now, because the elections are to parties, he got 4%. He could put 2 or 3 people in the Knesset. But on his list, he had only his name. So he was elected. After 3 years, he decided, he's so popular, that he will put more names on his list. And he put his wife's name. By then, the Israelis understood why he ran to the Knesset and they didn't vote for him. So this is the story about the threshold. And therefore, it was very low, and therefore we had very many parties of 1, 2 seats. But now, in 2 weeks from now, if you will not get 4 seats, you will not be able to join the Knesset. So this is the Israeli politics 101. Second point, I want to say something again briefly, and that is to praise Israeli democracy. Israel is a very strong democracy. Not if you compare it to the states in the Middle East, that goes without saying, but even if you compare it to many other societies, including the United States. And I could have my entire speech only about that, but I don't want to do that. I want to talk about more urgent and updated topics, so that will be very, very, very brief. Number 1, political participation is very high. It is high in elections. In the past, it used to be the turnout was about 80%. It went down during the last 20 years, like all democracies, to above 60%. And it's still higher than in most democracies. I guess that in 2 weeks from now, it will be higher than previously, because there's a feeling that more people are going to vote. But it's not only in elections. Israelis are very politically minded, they are very active. They write to to the editors. They speak about politics. Until some years ago, very many of them were members of parties. So the political participation is very high. Secondly, the Supreme Court and the court at large are very involved, very strong, and very independent, and are more, you could say, objective than American Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court functions as a bastion of democratic values and norms in Israel. Third, we have a very strong and biting media. Israeli media is very strong, in a way even stronger than American media. It brought about the fall down of several ministers, including Rabin. Prime Minister Rabin, first time that he was Prime Minister, fell because of a scoop of a journalist who realized that his wife had a foreign account in Washington, and he published it, and because of that, Rabin had to resign. By the way, the woman who, Elie, you like that, the woman who took Rabin's wife to the bank was Alma Gildenhorn, who founded my institute. I didn't know that, she told me. So, and we have a very open political system. The last elections, 2.5 years ago, a third of the members of Knesset were new faces, including many students, by the way, young people who were never before involved. So, and we have a very strong civil society, very many strong NGOs, and you know, all of you know that what Tocqueville spoke about American society, that the strength of American democracy comes from the strength of civil society. So Israel is a very strong democracy. But what I want to talk is about the elections, and before the last 2 months and the campaign, because when you look at elections, the elections can serve as a prism to tell you about very deep down social and political processes, about deep ingrained processes that occur in societies. And this is this is the reason why I'm so fascinated with elections. You realize things that usually are more difficult to discover. And I want to talk about 3 of them. Number 1 is the changes that took place in Israeli society. Social, demographic changes, and you can see them right away if you look at the list of the different parties presented to the Israeli electorate before the elections. We know more or less how many seats each of these parties will get, so we can look at the next phase of the Knesset and see what changes it will bring.
Yoram, do you want a slide? Do you want the slide of the...
We can do it, we can put it. So now, first, generally speaking, Israeli society has changed in the last decade or 15 years, became more religious. We invented the term for that, religionization of Israeli society, and moved more to the right on ideological issues. I will talk about that later, but let's see some major groups and their influence on Israeli society. Religious people, men with yarmulke. The number of religious members of Knesset went up dramatically 2 years ago. It will remain more or less the same, I guess, one more, 2 more, but not much more than it is now, but it's very high. Today we have 38 people in the Knesset who are religious people. I'm not talking about their beliefs, I'm talking about their practice. And the hat or the yarmulke is the best illustration. There were in the past only half of them. Today,
38 only Jews or including Muslims?
I'm talking about Jews. So I don't dare talking about the Arabs in front of such an expert. The Arabs asking. So this is a major change. 20, 30 years ago, there were half of that number. Within that group, people who are settlers, who represent the settlements in the territories. Today, we have 10. I guess that in 2 weeks we'll have 11 or maybe even 12. This is a huge number because 10 years ago there was no one of them, or 1 or 2 in the last 10 years. So 10% of the Knesset are settlers. Think of the major political change that it already has on the Israeli political scene. Another change, which I see very positive, is the growing number of women. Unfortunately, not enough. We have only 20% of the Knesset members that are women, but it's an increase if you compare it to 20 years ago or so. And it really shows much deeper changes in Israeli society. Women are getting now to much higher positions in all fields of life than they used to get, though definitely not enough. Another element, the vast majority of the new members of Knesset, of the Knesset, or the last majority of the new Knesset, members of the new Knesset, are Israeli-born people, Israeli-born citizens, and not immigrants, which is again a very interesting phenomenon. And if you look at the leaders of the parties, Bibi Netanyahu, Buzzi Herzog, Tzipi Livni, Tomi Lapid,
Yair.
Sam Lapid, Yair Lapid, Bennett, Kahlon, Deri, all of them were born in Israel. It's a generation of the Sabra. Another phenomenon, generals. Israel was unique in the world in the number of high-ranking officers who are members of Knesset. And usually, the last 20 years, the average was about 10%, about 12 of them were high-ranking officers. I'm not talking about lower-level officers, because there are so many Israelis who spend a few years in the military beyond the conscript, but about professional officers. And now, this is a dramatic change. The number probably will not be more than 6. It's the first time after very many years that you will not see so many generals in the Knesset. On the other hand, the number of journalists rocketed. 14 people in the next Knesset, which will be elected in 2 weeks, will be journalists. Many of them are from the television. Why less officers and more journalists? I will leave that to tell us about later, because I want to move to the other point, the second point. And that is the decline of parties, or the party system. If you want another term, the personalization of politics. Unlike the United States, Israel resembles more Western European tradition, and the parties are the cornerstones of Israeli politics. Parties are very strong, very important. Many people are members of parties, cardholder members. The parties meet not only before elections, but during the whole year. They have a platform, they discuss the manifesto, etc. The Western world is a process that was described by political scientists as the demise of parties. Parties is not important as they used to be. And in Israel, you see that very strongly. That's not new. It started about 15, 20 years ago. What is really new this year, which is a very negative development according to my value judgment, is the process in which we continue to talk about parties, and I said 12 parties will be elected, but these are not parties. These are lists that were established by the leader. You have individuals who decide to run, and they form the list. In the past, that was the case with the ultra-Orthodox parties. The rabbi decided who is going to run to the Knesset. And he said, Cohen will be number 1, Levi will be number 2, and Moshe will be number 3 on our list. Today, you have half of the number of Knesset, half of the number of Knesset members are going, or were decided not by primaries or other democratic means within the parties, but by the leader of the party. The first one who started with that was the leader of the former Soviet immigrants parties, Avigdor Lieberman, who decided who is going to be on his list. And before he had to present his list 2 years ago.
I think Raful started it way back, didn't he?
Sorry?
Raphael Eitan, the late Raphael Eitan.
Yeah, but there were some cases in the past where these people had a major impact, but in such a vulgar way. I think that Lieberman was the first one. He had number 2 in his party was the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. He didn't like him, so on the day where he was supposed to present the list to the Knesset committee, he called him and over the phone told him, oh, by the way, you're not going to be on the list any longer. This guy was a deputy minister, and just like that. So he changed people, put on and off his list very easily. Today, take the newest list, or party, Kulanu, all of us, of Kahlon, he decided who is going to be on his list. And he picked people from different places. Who will be the nicest people who he thinks might add to the prestige or the sex appeal of the party, and put these people on the list. That's not democratic. I think it's very bad. And you already saw what happened, and that happened in the other new party led by Bennett, that he was able to influence the list. And he put a well-known Israeli football guy who became a football commentator. Soccer. That Ohana, it was such a vulgar way that there was such a strong reaction that he had to ask him to resign from the list. So Ohana said, I don't like it, I changed my mind, I don't want to be a member of Knesset. But it was really reached that stage that it was very negative. So the parties that were based and built on ideology and on strong membership, on loyalty to the party, do not exist anymore. Ideology is very important. In the 50s, I will never forget that. Before elections, each party used to have its convention and discuss the manifesto. What is going to be our program before the elections that will present to the people? One of the parties, the most extreme left-wing party, Mapam, had a conference that took 3 days. And what was the topic of the conference? What are we, Mapam? Are we Marxist-Leninist party? Or are we Marxist-Leninist party? That was the topic. I hope that the students understand that, because when I said that to my students, they said, what is Marxist, what is Leninist? I see that people know that. So today, the Likud party ran without any manifesto, without any platform. Oh, they know what we think, what we are for. We don't need that. There's no ideology. By the way, the term ideology in Israel, like in Europe, has a very positive connotation, unlike in the United States. In the United States, if you're pragmatic, it's better than if you have a strong ideology. The Israeli tradition is different. So if you don't have ideology, if you don't have platform, if you don't have values, what do you need? Recognition. Why am I going to vote for Hillary Clinton? Because I know her. I saw her so many times. If it's Carter, who came from the South, we don't know him, so we are not going to vote for him. Recognition. And therefore, journalists are so important, and particularly journalists working on television. Everybody knows them. So things are connected and show some of the negative things that occur in Israeli society. Let me go to the last point, and that is that because there is no agenda, because there is no ideology, because there is no program, the election campaign was very old this time. Almost all the parties, definitely the opposition parties, tried to put at the center of the public opinion issues that are related with social and economic topics, standard of living, housing, the difficult difficulties of young people to reach reasonable life economically. These are the topics that most Israelis are really worried about in the last several years. This is the reason why Israel had this tent movement 3 years ago in the summer. And it was called the cottage revolution. You know about that? It started because of the high price of cottage. Another major
cheese, Yoram.
cottage cheese. That's right. Cottage cheese. Another major debate that took place in Israel a year ago because of the price of milky. Another 10 cents of food, because someone in Israel who lives in Berlin realized that the sort of the milky that they have there is much cheaper than in Israel. So he said, why can't we have cheap food in Israel? So the issues are really issues of standard of living, cost of living, etc. The governing party, particularly Netanyahu, tried to shift the focus on security, because Bibi Netanyahu still has the image of Mr. Security. Though there is a very strong tendency to undercut that concept, particularly in the last 2 weeks, when a group of 180 former generals, 180 generals, came out and saying that Bibi is very dangerous to Israel's security. And this evening they are going to have, we're supposed to have a huge meeting in Tel Aviv on that particular topic.
Demonstration.
So on one hand you have the cost of living, the other hand you have the security issues. And this is one of the reasons that Bibi Netanyahu came to talk in Washington. Don't fool yourself. He could have worked. I don't want to go into the topic, but and I think that he's right in putting forward the threat that Iran has on Israel. But he could choose another avenue to discuss the topic with the administration. And the reason he came to the Congress was definitely because that is the best campaign ad on Israeli television. And indeed, I guess that in the last 2 or 3 days, he got 2 or more % than he had a week ago. And the probability that he will win is higher than it was before he came. So it was clearly a political act. The point is not that. The point is the following, and that is that the most important topic that should be at the center of Israeli elections is not there. And that is the territories, the occupation, the peace process, the Palestinians. Nothing. The word peace has not been mentioned during the elections. How come? This is because though the Israeli public opinion in the last 2 decades moved to the left on the principle of their attitude towards the territories, and the majority are willing to negotiate peace in return for territories. The same number of people, about 2/3 of the Israeli population, believe that there is no partner to negotiate with. So why should we talk about it? There's no one to talk to. And therefore, that's not the issue on the agenda. And that's a mistake. Because this is the most important item on Israeli, should be on Israeli agenda. And this is the most important issue that will determine the future of Israel. What sort of a country will be? What sort of a democracy will be? This should have been the most important topic. And it's not there. So if you look at the election campaign, it's very funny, excellent TV ads, and more than that, social media that is very active. There are wonderful jokes, fantastic jokes. I enjoy watching them. But this should have not been the center of the campaign. The center of the campaign should be what is our future? What are we going to do? Are we going to renegotiate with Palestinians or not? Should we recognize the Hamas or should we fight them? Should we accept the Arab League initiative, or should we say that's just a gimmick and we should not do that? These are the important questions. Should we put money in the territories or not, for settlements or not? How can we discuss the Israeli economy if we don't discuss the investments in settlements? These issues are not there, and And this is why the campaign really does not deal with the most important issue. There are a few more points, but I will leave them to the following part of our evening. So,
I will speak about the Arab vote in the upcoming Knesset elections. Now, as Yoram did 101, let me first say that the Arab and Druze minority in Israel constitutes nearly 20% of Israel's population. In figures, we're talking about 1.8 million citizens out of a total of more than 8 million inhabitants. However, the Arabs, and I'll say Arabs meaning Jews as well, so I'll save myself a repetitive pattern. The Arabs constitute only 15% of the electorate, those who are eligible to vote. And this does not include East Jerusalem. So 15% versus 20, the difference is due to the demographic reasons. I will not go into that now. Now, typically on a regular election campaign, I would not be invited to the podium. In the sense that no special attention would have been directed to the Arab vote. The Arabs have been traditionally marginalized, excluded from mainstream Israeli politics, so there wasn't really a special reason to deal with them. However, this time, some dramatic developments occurred which might radically impact the political scene. The Arab parties became or may become a factor which the Jewish political blocs can no longer ignore or exclude. So what happened? In March, the Knesset raised, as Yoram had already indicated, the threshold for party representation in the Knesset from 2% to 3.25%. This had an immediate effect on the Arab political scene. Presently, there are these are the polls, but presently we have four Arab parties are represented in the Knesset with a total of 10 Knesset members. The four are Hadash, a communist-led Jewish Arab list. They have 3 plus 1. 1 is Jewish, so it's actually 4. Ra'am and Ta'al, 2 conservative lists led by Islamists of the southern faction of the Islamic movement in Israel, the more moderate faction, and Balad, the National Democratic Alliance, a radical nationalist party. So, fearful that if they run separately, none would pass the threshold, the Arab parties were forced to unite under one list known as the joint list. You see them here, number 3. These are the projected results from a poll conducted over the weekend, published in Haaretz. These are just polls, so don't rely on them too much. So, a joint list. The polls immediately reflected the popularity of the new list. Some polls predict that almost 70% of the Arab vote will go to the new list, while the Zionist parties will get something like between 10 and 15%. However, these figures relate to some 14% who are undecided, so we should be careful. Let's examine, with your permission, the joint list more closely. Number one, the first thing we want to look at is a platform. They do have a platform. I don't know how to interpret it. They still go along the older pattern of Israeli politics. Now, when you look at the pattern, it's a hybrid of conflicting political outlooks. It represents conciliatory formula to overcome political and ideological differences. A patchwork, I would say, of staunch nationalist stances along more moderate views. Thus, for example, in addition to the call to end the occupation, a traditional call raised by all Arab parties, this list demands the dismantling of all Jewish settlements, something that was not shared by them in the past. It seeks to to achieve a just solution to the refugee problem, including the right of return, according to UN Resolution 194. With regard to the Arab minority, some interesting clauses in the platform. On the one hand, it repeats the old-style call for full civic equality and an end to socioeconomic discrepancies, but it also fairly demands recognition of the Arab minority as a homeland minority, a national minority with collective and individual rights. Now, I don't have time to go into this, but this statement has far-reaching ramifications. Also, the right of internal refugees to return to their home, overturn the draft requirement of the Druze, and similar such radical proposals. So, how consistent and solid is the platform? I would assume that the internal cohesiveness, as you could have already learned from my comments before, the internal cohesiveness of the joint list seems fragile and its sustainability questionable. It seems to be an artificial framework covering unresolved differences. Islamists versus communists. How do you get these two groups together? Hamas versus Fatah supporters. Sharia courts advocates versus secular civic courts backers. Feminists versus conservatives, and so forth. Now, many tend to see the platform as a reflection of an opportunistic move on the part of the Arab politicians trying to save their skin, politicians who, due to electoral constraint, were involuntarily forced to relinquish principles and compromise over a loose platform. Second point I want to talk about is the turnout. Yoram already referred to that. However, within the Arab sector, we have noticed a steep decline in the rate of participation in elections. In 2001, if I'm not mistaken, it reached a low ebb of 18% only after the October riots, if you may recall. However, last year, or last elections, the rate of participation was 56%. So we've seen this decline, and now the polls predict a possible rise to a percentage around 65%. This rise is mostly explained by the voters' long-time wish
compared to what percentage in the Jewish population in participation in the elections?
More or less the same, low 60s.
So the rise is mostly explained by the voters' long-time wish to see the Arab parties unite. Now, of course, the higher the turnout will be, the more seats, Knesset seats, the Jewish list may garner. Polls again predict 12 to 15. This one, as of Friday, predicts 13 seats to the United Arab list, the joint list, actually. I mean, this is not our list, it's the United list, which you can see in the graph, which means that the Arab list will be the third largest party in the Israeli parliament, something that has never happened before. However, speaking about the turnout, we should ask whether the joint list would offset the causes which led to the gradual decline in Arab turnout in the last 2 decades. And I should say that these continue to exist. Some of these elements are the powerlessness of Arab Knesset members, their inability to bring out a significant change. The struggle for civic equality in the platform is secondary. Furthermore, there is another element here. Separatist groups continuously call to boycott the elections. These include Arab nationalists and the more radical, dogmatic northern faction of the Islamic movement. A large segment of the younger Arab generation are vigorously anti-Israel and anti-Zionist. Therefore, it might be premature to predict a sizable rise in the Arab turnabout which would, of course, impact the results of this poll. I'm getting now to my last point. Don't be impressed by what I just said. Whenever an academic speaker says, I'm about to conclude, or let's summarize, not to be impressed. But I mean it in this case. So the last point I want to talk about is the day after, or the morning after. And would these changes that I have alluded to represent a step towards the legitimate entrance of the Arabs into the Israeli mainstream politics? Well, I'll have to indulge in speculations here, but let's do it. That's why we have this event being held before the election and not after the election, as as it has been suggested to us. So, assuming the joint list will be the third largest race, it may have a significant say on who would form the next coalition. This is the change. It seems reasonable that the joint list may recommend to the president of the state that the Zionist Union, headed by Herzog Livni, will be given the task of forming the next government. Now, let's not forget that their main motivation is to topple the Netanyahu government. So, it sounds reasonable. However, would Herzog be ready to pay the price in return? This is a give and take process. It's a negotiation. Now, the leaders of the joint list have already made it clear what they want. Substantial budgetary demands, legislation such as recognizing the Nakba Day as a national mourning day for the Arabs in Israel, insistence on being given the chairmanship of central Knesset committees such as finance, economics, interior, with direct reference to the Arab sector. Now, accepting of these demands seem to be a remote possibility. I suspect that the Jewish side is not ready yet to end the exclusion of Arabs as legitimate partners in a government. Herzog would not seemingly risk alienating Jewish constituencies by endorsing Arab partners. Another option is for the Arabs to function as an obstruction bloc. In 1992, the Arab party supported then Prime Minister Rabin from outside the coalition. And in return, Rabin had seriously addressed the burning issues of the Arab sector, such as education, health, and so forth. This period was the closest that the Arab parties ever got to the decision-making circle. So I can definitely envisage a situation where again we'll have an obstruction bloc supporting a Zionist union-led government. And now to my concluding remarks. While the establishment of the joint list signifies a fresh and promising turning point in the decades-long features of Arab politics in Israel, the acceptance of Arabs, as I had already indicated, in spite of their potential rise in electoral power, seemed premature from both a Jewish point of view and an Arab point of view. The Arabs expect change on the socio-economic level, more integration. But if the joint list will not be able to deliver, the disenchantment, disappointment of the Arab minority with their current status may lead the Arab political system into potential following directions. Number one, a further strengthening of inclination, mostly within the Arab nationalist and Islamic dogmatics, to boycott Knesset elections. Or a more intensive search for viable alternative paths to achieve equality by, for example, adopting a more aggressive strategy in the struggle for equality, and I will further elaborate on that, what aggressive means. Or, alternatively, establish autonomous frameworks of representation of their own. This way or another, the 20th Knesset elections may herald a sea change in Jewish-Arab relations and in the nature and structure of Arab politics in Israel. Thank you.
One, there will be 2 more Arab members of Knesset, but not from the Arab list, because there is a member of Knesset, an Arab member of Knesset in the
Sure.
the Zionist bloc, and another one in Meretz.
And also some within the national list.
Right.
Israel Beitenu has an Arab Druze
Yeah. So there will be
member,
more.
and Habayit Yehudi, Bennett's party, also has an Arab there.
But the second point is more important, and that you see what the major weakness of the Israeli left is the problem of the Arabs. Because if you take the Jews only, there's a built-in majority for the center-right, about 60 seats out of the 120, while the center-left has only 50. So the only solution for the left to be in power is to collaborate with the Arabs. But because the Arabs sociologically are not included, politically they are equal citizens, but sociologically they are not included. Therefore, the left has a major problem. And it will be very difficult for the left to establish the coalition. Though this time it will be easier, and I will be happy to elaborate that, unless you want something else.
No, I mean,
Okay, so let me say that. I started by saying that it's very difficult to forecast the results of the elections. On one hand, the blocs, the old parties, were always more or less the same size. But on the other hand, in each and every elections, there was a surprise, mainly in the center. In 1977, a new party was created and got 15 seats, 10% of the Knesset. In 2003, a new party was created, Lapid's father, 15 seats. In 2006, a new party was created of the veterans, 7 seats in the Knesset. And Yair Lapid got 19 seats in 2013. So in almost every elections, you have a new party. All of these parties disappeared after one term. But because of the changing nature of the politics today, because you don't talk about parties but personalities, it is easy for the 3 or 4 or 5 small, medium-sized parties today to join either the left or the right. People like Kahlon, he came from the Likud, but he could join a center-left coalition. Lapid could join either center-left or center-right. So this time, for the first time, the 4 or 5 parties can move either left or right, which makes this election so fascinating. And it's only a matter of bargaining what these leaders will get, what portfolios they will get, how much budget will go to this party. And therefore, even if Netanyahu will win, the probability that Bougie Herzog will be able to attract these individual leaders is high, which makes these elections more fascinating than the previous ones for professionals who enjoy the game and unpredictable.
under these very sensitive circumstances, where you cannot predict which party would go to what direction, the fact that there is a bloc with 13 or even more Arab Knesset members, by the way, it's Arab Jewish, there's one Jew there, because the Hadash party is a Jewish Arab party, so it's at least one Jewish Knesset member, is most significant. Now, if the exclusion would continue, as it was for the last 66, 7 years, then they are not to be counted. They should be eliminated from the negotiating process, which bears a price. If you are alienated, and remember the option that I alluded to at the end of my presentation, this might signal a new era in Jewish-Arab relations, because the dissatisfaction, the process of alienation is there. The radicals are there. Now the Arabs constitute almost 21% of Israel's population. With the median age of the Arab population in Israel is 18. half of the 1.8 million, 900,000 are under the age of 18. And the potential for an explosion, I don't want to sound dramatic, is, I mean, the chances for some sort of an explosion are there.
What about the split after the elections? The
Well, I
the
suppose-
United Party might split.
Absolutely.
Some of them might join, others will not.
Well, this is the great hope, quote unquote, of some of their Israeli friends. That this, I spoke about the cohesiveness or the lack of cohesion, and both in the platform and in the political system. Yes, they may split, they may return and be different parties, which then are even weaker. But then the frustration of the Arab public grows. So, thank you very much. And I hope that this helps somehow to understand what will happen in 3 weeks' time. Thank you.